Hi, good afternoon. I'm just so glad that you all are here with me today. I've chosen you sixth grade math teachers for a reason. So I'm excited to show you about what we're going to talk about. I know we've had an exciting morning of seeing each other again and getting to know each other, seeing what we all did on summer vacation. But now I'm excited and I'm ready to get into some of the content of what our year is going to look like. That being said, the district has asked us to revamp the way we approach our curriculum and our lesson planning. We're going to be starting a new approach to this lesson planning that's called backwards design. Backwards design is planning our lessons by thinking about the end results. I want you to think about building a house. If I gave you $5 million today and you got to take that money and build your dream house with it, say, you already had the land and the property, what's the first thing that you would do? Well, you would probably go and do the plan of your house. You'd meet with a builder and y'all would do the architectural design of the house. You can't go and lay floors and build walls until you know where the floors and the walls are supposed to be. So, that being said, it's very similar to backwards design. We're thinking about what the students need to know, the TEKS, the objectives, before we plan how we're going to get there. So, follow along with me. You have some handouts there at your table. I want you to refer to those as we're going through this design, and if you have questions, please let me know. We are in this together. So, backwards design is planning with instruction with the end in mind. So the first thing that I want us to do is, in front of you, you have our TEKS, your math, sixth grade math TEKS. So you need to think about, when you're looking at those, what is it exactly that the students need to learn? What are the desired results of your TEKS? I've went ahead and pulled the TEKS that we're kind of going to start with today. We're going to use these TEKS to kind of help us understand the way to use backwards design. So these are probably my favorite TEKS of sixth grade math. I think that this is important life lessons here. So this TEK is about personal financial literacy. The student will apply mathematical process standards to develop an economic way of thinking and problem solving. That being said, they're going to go through and they have to be able to understand checking accounts and debit cards. Knowing the difference between a credit card and a debit card. They have to be able to balance a checkbook, establish good credit history, and all of the things that have to do with financial success. So, personal financial literacy. The student applies mathematical process standards to develop an economic way of thinking and problem solving. I pulled the specific one. We're going to distinguish between debit cards and credit cards. So, in front of you at your tables, you have the levels of Bloom's taxonomy. What level of Bloom's taxonomy is required to be able to distinguish something? Yes, analysis, you're right. You have to, this is the analysis level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So the end result of this TEK is to be able to analyze, to be able to distinguish between debit cards and credit cards. I want you to talk for a minute at your tables. What would it look like if a student understood the difference between debit cards and credit cards? What would it look like? You could also talk about what it doesn't look like. But we want to understand where we want our students to go. So take a moment, turn and talk. Okay, So, mastery of this tech would look like knowing when to use a debit card or a credit card. It might look like understanding that credit cards have interest rates and debit cards do not. Debit cards pull money out of your checking account directly. Credit cards, you don't really have money. Credit cards are not cash. Debit cards are cash. So, now that you understand where the student has to go, what they have to understand, I want you to think about some essential questions that you could ask to deepen the student's understanding. So you might want to think about what is the motive of a credit card company. If a student understands the motive behind credit cards companies, do you think that they would use credit cards more often or less often? Can you identify the different parts of credit cards and debit cards? What conclusions can you make about a debit card versus a credit card? Think about some essential questions that would help the students understand. So, once you know where the student is going, what they have to be able to understand, questions that you can ask the student and they would be able to answer, okay? So now, let's talk about acceptable evidence and assessments. So what evidence should students be able to produce to show that they've mastered the content? So this might be just a good, solid conversation. This might be a journal entry. This might be they're creating their own credit card offer. They're the credit card company creating an offer to send to you. Get creative here. There's lots of different ways that the students can show evidence of learning. And then you can also, we also want to create an end of unit assessment that supports the level of mastery expected by the TEKS. So at this time, you would have assessment questions. You would go ahead and make the assessment for the student to show that they've mastered the TEKS. This would probably look like incorporating all of the TEKS underneath standard 14. So you would incorporate, standards 14A through H, not just the one about credit cards versus debit cards. So we have the end in mind. We know our objective. We know the desired outcome. We know what we want the students to be able to do. We know questions that they need to be able to answer. We know what our end of unit assessment looks like. We also know what the evidence that the students produce to show us that they understand. We know what that looks like. So now I want you to think about weekly assessments that you can do. How are you going to measure the learning throughout this unit? You can't just wait till the last 6 weeks and make sure that everyone knows. That's not best practice. We know that in order to properly gauge our next day's activities, we have to be able to understand and know if the student mastered the content that we presented that day. So, how are you going to measure the learning throughout the unit, and in what ways can you assess the student's understanding? I do not just want pencil and paper tests each week. We don't need to do checkpoints every single week to make sure that they understand. Assessments can look in many different ways. So get creative and think about all the different ways you could assess your student. So once we have all of that framework completed, this is where you start lesson planning. This is where the teaching part comes in. The stuff that we've already talked about, that's not teaching, that's assessing, and that's knowing where they need to go. Now we're talking about the learning experiences and the instruction that you, the teacher, are going to plan for the student in order for them to be successful. So at this time, you would create weekly lesson plans that meet each objective. You're going to provide meaningful activities and opportunities that allow students to understand the concepts. So now this is where you start thinking about, what are you going to do? How are you, the teacher, going to facilitate the students' learning and help them understand the content that you need to present to them? How are you going to present the content to them? Where are you going to present the content to them? In what ways, what media are you going to use? This is where you start lesson planning. So, in front of you, you have this lesson plan format. I filled in some of it for you just with examples. Now, this is not all of the things that you can write. This is just to get you started. So you can see that you have the identify the desired results. So we put up at the top, distinguish between debit cards and credit cards. Then you have the key understandings. So, credit cards are earned based on a credit score. Purchases made on credit cards earn interest. Debit cards pull money from checking. This is where you're going to write what you want your students to understand. On the other side of that, you have your essential questions. Use your Bloom's taxonomy question stems to help create the essential questions that the students need to be able to answer. So, and then the next box, you have students are going to be able to, and then you're going to use your own words. So I wrote, students will be able to understand the difference between debit cards and credit cards. They will understand how both work and are used daily. So how are these cards used on a daily basis? When would I choose to use one card over the other? These are my own words here. So determine evidence for assessing your learning. So this is where you're having your assessments. Performance tasks. So I listed a couple of tasks here, and then I also put some other evidence on the other side. This is formative assessment, and on this side, performance indicators. So then on the bottom, stage 3, this is where you, the teacher, put in your activities for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is your weekly lesson plan template. So this is where you're going to do your lesson plans. Notice that you have to start at the top before you can get to the bottom. Backwards design is all about understanding what the end result should be and working your way backwards through it to get to how you're going to plan for the students. I want you to work as tables right now to fill in some more ideas onto this. You can also take a different TEK underneath standard 14. Take a TEK A, you can use B if you'd like, C, D, all the way through H, S tables. And I want you to kind of work your way through this, and I'm going to be walking around answering questions, helping you understand the premise, because when we do it together now, then I hope that you'll be able to start implementing this slowly throughout the year. And then we're going to be streamlining it across content levels and grade levels. So thank you, and go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions, I'm right here for you. Thank you so much.